Hello, my name is Rain and welcome to my channel where I discuss fantasy Formula 1. Now, you don't usually see videos from me on Saturdays. It's happened once before and it's happening again because we have to discuss the final Fix chip and what happened at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix qualifying. So strap in, let's talk about every possible scenario, every possible team, and answer the question, should you final Fix Norris? Before we go into permutations on what you should do with your team, with which assets you have at 2x and etc., all of that stuff, we need to talk about a bit why, what happened, and what we are expecting our assets to score, right? Because this is all about expected points. What do we think our assets are going to score, right? And let's look at F1 Fantasy Tools, fantastic website, because you can do this, right? When you final fix an asset, you remove that asset from your team, you gain the points that that asset you brought in gets in the race only. You don't get the qualifying points. And then all of the team value calculations at the end of the weekend is made with your previous team, aka the driver or the asset which you transferred out. You can only final fix drivers, and essentially what this means is that we don't care about qualifying points. We're only going to look at what drivers usually score in races. Now, I've seen a lot of people speculate on what's going to happen in the Baku Grand Prix, and a lot of people are saying that Charles Leclerc will win. Yes, he is in pole, it's difficult to overtake, but I do think Oscar Piastri has a very good chance of also winning this race. So we have to look at this in two ways, right? If you have Norris starting from, I think it's P16 now after Gasly got disqualified, right? Gasly got disqualified if you haven't seen that. So I think Norris is starting from P16. What can Norris score from P16? And will it be worth transferring out the asset you now have, right? And to figure it out, we need to figure out how much will our drivers score? How much will Norris score, for example? From P16, right? This entire season, it's been a very, very clear Formula A and Formula B, as I've called it. Formula A being Red Bull, Mercedes, McLaren, and Ferrari, the top 8. We've seen that almost every race this season, and between 8th and 9th place when no driver has DNF'd, there's been a good, solid 30 seconds free pit stop territory level of gap. Why is this important? Well, it's because I think even Norris stating in the post-quali press conference, stating that it's difficult to overtake in Baku, I think it's important to note that I still think he's going to pass all the back markers. I don't think Norris is finishing this race in P10. I also have to add in a caveat here, I'm not calculating any DNF risk into this whatsoever. I do think there's a bit more of a DNF risk for Norris because he's starting in sort of the meat grinder territory, so to speak. But you can't really calculate this with DNF. Like, DNF is always a risk in F1 Fantasy. So I'm going to ignore DNFs from now on, right? I think Norris, worst case, non-DNF, I think he finishes the race in 8th place. How many positions, how many points will he get then? Well, he's starting the race in P16, which means that he's going to increase in 8 positions. He gets 4 points from getting 8th, right? That's 12. And then let's say an 8 or so overtakes, just to make it simple. This could be more, this could be less, but he could also be 7th after a DNF or something like that. That puts Norris at 20 points after qualifying. So Norris, in the worst case scenario, in my opinion, that's not a DNF, I think Norris is going to be around 20 or so points. Looking at something like Italy, like Zandvoort, a 20-point haul means that unless someone is picking up crazy points, I mean, you're gonna be the second highest scoring driver. Look at Zandvoort, right? Leclerc, Hamilton, 21-21, 19. Then we have Belgium, 25-25, and then a drop to 13. Hungary, you have someone at 27, but then 20-18. You see where these drivers, these B tier and A tier drivers usually land when they don't win. Which means the only time I think it's worth transferring Norris in is if you think you're going to catch the winner. another important thing to note, Norris is likely to get around 20-ish points, 19, 20-ish points. What happens if Norris, he can also get 18, if overtaking is hard and he just overtakes on pure pace with strategy, right? But being in the back of Formula A, aka being in 8th, is quite likely to be the position where you have a free pit stop at the end. We've seen this multiple times this season where the person in 8th, usually Checo, has pitted to try and get the fastest lap at the end. And it also has happened and it's not happened, but there has often been a free pit stop somewhere in that range, right? Meaning that if Norris ends up being 8th, he could end up, pitting for the fastest lap. He could also end up being on a different strategy, starting on the hards, for example, which means he would pit onto mediums later, which means he would be on fresher mediums with a lighter car later on, and thus be more likely to pick up the fastest lap if no one else can pit for the fastest lap. So I also think out of all the drivers right now, I think Norris has the biggest chance. It's still just a small chance, right? But usually, right, it's 1 in 8. It's not very often that someone not in the top 4 teams gets the fastest lap. Norris has a chance, and I think the highest chance out of anyone in that top 8 to pick up the fastest lap this race, because the McLaren is still fast, especially later on when degradation is high and the fuel in the car gets low. So Norris could, even if he ends up 8th, he could get like a 27, 28 up to 30 point haul. And in that case, that is a haul, because at that point he is going to be the second highest scoring driver. And looking like if you look at how many points drivers score in a weekend when they are the second best driver, they usually score around 25-ish points. 24, 27, that's a 35, that's a sprint race, so that doesn't count. 29, that's an outlier. 28, 18, 25, sprint race, 28. So you see where these people land. So Norris could definitely land there, finishing 8th with the fastest lap. And again, this is no qualifying points. This is just the race points. And we can remove the sprint points. I guess we can look at this. 29 points in Austria, 17 in the US, in Miami, 28 points in China. So you see the range, right? So when I go into my sort of going through each and every asset and when I think you should final fix, keep in mind that for this to work out, you probably need to final fix the winner. So the reason I have this slide here is because I think if you don't have either Leclerc or Piastri, I think this is when you are even considering using the final fix. Which drivers am I talking about? Well, every other premium driver. Maybe not Russell, because Russell is at a specific price point where it's quite difficult to final fix. So maybe if you have Russell, this video is also not for you. But if you have Lewis Hamilton, if you have Checo Perez, if you have Max Verstappen, God forbid, or if you have Lando Norris, I think that's when you even consider final fixing. Because if I were to place a bet now on who were to win the Baku Grand Prix, the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, I think it's either Charles Leclerc or Oscar Piastri. Charles Leclerc starting from pole looks to be in a great position. Oscar Piastri and the McLaren have shown great pace at the end when degradation is high, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Oscar Piastri winning. Now, another thing that's important when you final fix is that if you final fix your driver that's in the 2x spot, the driver you get in will get those 2x points, right? So say, for example, you have Norris as a 2x, which I know many of you, including myself, have, and you final fix in either Leclerc or Piastri, the driver you bring in will get double points. Now, here's the thing. I've seen a lot of people say that automatically, if you are sitting with Norris, Piastri, and you don't have Leclerc, it's a no-brainer. Just get Leclerc in for Norris. But I don't think it's that easy. It's never that easy in F1 Fantasy. And the reason for that is I could definitely see Oscar Piastri winning. And in that case, where, a Norris, for example, were to finish P8, say then Piastri wins, right? Remember what happened in Monza, right? Norris here has the fastest lap. So he was on 16 points. That's sort of what we're expecting to happen. Now, Leclerc got 39 points, won the race, driver of the day, some positions gained in an overtake. Piastri, who got second place, 18 points, 2 overtakes, right? This could just as well be flipped. I think either Leclerc or Piastri is getting 39 and the other is getting 20-ish points. Let's put it at 40. One of Leclerc and Piastri is getting 40 points, the other is getting 20. And then Lando Norris is sitting there, if he gets fastest lap, likely to be on 26 to 30 points. If he doesn't, looking to be somewhere in the sort of 18 to 19 point range, just below this. Which means if you transfer in with a final fix Norris to a Leclerc, and then Piastri ends up winning, they're getting driver of the day, Leclerc ends up being second, you might lose points, or you might just gain a teeny weeny bit. With that said, if you don't have Charles Leclerc or Piastri, if you're sitting with Max Verstappen, I think it's a no-brainer. You bring in whichever one of this one you don't have as your 2x. If you have Checo, I think you bring in whichever one of these you can afford, probably Piastri. If you're sitting with Sainz and you can go up to either of them, I think you do it. All drivers that you can afford to upgrade to either Leclerc or Piastri, I think is worth the punt. It's just how good is Norris going to be from that P16 spot. Now, I've also seen some people say that they should final fix Norris in. I think that's a mistake, frankly. And for the same reason why it's not a guaranteed pick to just bring Norris in or to bring Norris out for Piastri or Leclerc. If we go to this stat screen again, right, we're looking at a Norris that's getting 18 or 28 points, right? That's sort of the range I'm putting. It's either 18 or it's 28. If you bring Norris in, who are you bringing him in for? It's probably either Piastri or Leclerc, maybe Hamilton. And in that case, it's better to gamble on the 50-50 Leclerc and Piastri, because one of them is getting 20 points and the other is likely to be around 40. So I think if you are sitting with anyone that's not these top 3 drivers right here, you do not final fix Norris in ever. That is not the play. You final fix in Piastri or Leclerc and hope they win. You bet on the 50-50. But it's just a specific scenario where you're sitting with Norris and you have either Piastri or Leclerc, because that's when it also gets interesting. Now, I'm going to do this specifically on my second team just to demonstrate what happens, right? These are my 2 teams. I made this team later on. It doesn't have any points. It's fine. What I'm going to do is show you how this works, right? Final fix. I'm going to use it on my second team just to demonstrate. Continue. You transfer out Norris. On this specific team, I'm going to do Charles Leclerc. I'm going to continue, confirm it, and you see that the DRS boost automatically is on Charles Leclerc. Lando Norris counts as replaced. For my main team, I have not yet decided whether I'm going to do it, because as you can see, I already have Piastri. So I only have Charles Leclerc as an option. Transferring out Piastri for Leclerc, that's just a mistake. Piastri could just as easily win the race over Leclerc, in my opinion. So getting Leclerc in for Norris is very, very much a 50-50 decision. Norris, in terms of a driver of the day range, he would probably need to climb up to above 8th position. This entire video so far, I've been discussing Norris in position 8, P8. He could definitely climb higher than that. I don't know it's certain, but if the McLaren is as fast as it's been in some different circuits so far this year, I don't see why he couldn't get up to a P4, P5. And at that point, we're talking even more points and even more, he might not get the fastest lap at that point, but, he's making up points by doing overtakes and increasing in position. And if Norris gets to the podium, especially if it's ahead of Max Verstappen and it's been a dull race at the front where Leclerc or Piastri just pulled off at the start and never looked likely to lose, that's when I can see Norris getting driver of the day as well. So it is very, very a very fine margin, because I could do the final fix on Leclerc right now, and then it turns out that Piastri wins the race, and I can't 2x Piastri. If I could, I would move the 2x from Piastri, or the 2 Piastri from Norris, but I can't do that. I would have to put it on Leclerc with a transfer, and that would include getting Norris out. I think personally, I'm going to sleep on it, see how I feel in the morning. And if you want to know what I end up doing, make sure you follow me on Twitter, because I'm going to post it there if I end up going through with the transfer. The only thing I can do with my personal team is Lando Norris to Charles Leclerc. Let me be clear. Now, let's quickly talk about the opposite scenario. Say you're sitting with Lando Norris and Charles Leclerc, and you have the 2x on Lando Norris. Do you switch it to Piastri? And I think that's a similar situation. You're essentially betting then on Piastri winning the race over Charles Leclerc. I think it's slightly less likely, only because Leclerc starts on pole, but we've seen what happens when Leclerc starts on pole. It's never a guarantee for Leclerc, so it's close. It's gonna be close. I think even if you're sitting with this combo or with the Lando Norris Leclerc combo, you have the 2x on Leclerc. I do think you still have to think about it, and it's never going to be an easy decision, this, because I just think that Lando Norris is likely to be at least close in points to the driver who ends up getting second out of Piastri and Leclerc. Another scenario that I just thought of in my mind as well is if you say you have something like Lando Norris, Charles Leclerc, and you already have the 2x on Leclerc, and you're thinking about whether transferring Norris out for Piastri but without getting the 2x boost, I think then the answer is strictly no, right? Imagine the points we're expecting Lando Norris to get. Even if Piastri ends up being the one out of Piastri and Leclerc to get those 40 points to win the driver of the day, the difference between Piastri and the Lando Norris that does decently well is only about 12-ish points. See, 40 to 28 points, right? I only think the final fix is worth it here if it's on the DRS boosted slot. For example, you know, I wouldn't do it, but I wouldn't do Piastri to Leclerc here, right? If I think Leclerc is going to win over Piastri, I just don't see the point. At that point, you have to bet. You have to put all your eggs in one basket and bet on the person you're transferring in to win the race and get that haul of 40 points, 25 points plus driver of the day, plus some overtakes, etc. So overall, a very, very interesting weekend, and we'll just see what I end up doing tomorrow. Right now, I am leaning towards switching to Leclerc. I think Leclerc is more likely than Piastri to win, but it's by a fine margin, and that fine margin is currently swaying me in the position of going through with the final fix. Also because it's turned out to be very, very difficult to find a good final fix opportunity this year, with there not being a clear pole sitter and not that many engine penalties. So I don't know when a better opportunity for the final fix would arise. But then again, if Norris ends up climbing up to P3, getting driver of the day, I will be on a suicide watch list somewhere in the world. So all in all, a very, very interesting scenario. I do not know what I'm going to do yet. If you already know, if you've already decided, if you've already used the final fix, let me know down in the comments. With that said, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all on the deadline stream next weekend for Singapore, and in the 2 videos I'm posting this week, a transfer plans video, team selection video. Follow me on Twitter if you want to see what I end up doing. I still have not decided. I'm 55% in favor of using the final fix at the moment for my particular team, about 45% against. Similar if you're sitting with Lando Norris, Leclerc, and you're thinking of Piastri, just a slightly less, maybe like a 60-40 split. Or rather, even more like close to like a 50-50 split then. So that looks even an even harder decision. If you don't have if you already have the 2x on someone other than Norris, in terms of these 3 assets, right? Leclerc, Piastri, Norris. Like if you already have the 2x on a Piastri or on Leclerc, I don't think you're switching. Does that make sense? All right. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you later. Good night and goodbye.